is just fantastic. Last week I offered a challenge up for all of you lovely people. The challenge was that if the video on Anita Sarkeesian had 1,000 likes, I would make a video on female space marines. Within 4 hours that target had been met, so shortly after I made a Twitter poll because I wanted to gauge a response from my audience. Should there be female space marines or not? No one. But it was quite close. So it is definitely worth addressing. I am now going to state for the sake of it, there is a very good reason I don't make much Warhammer content on this channel, even though my name is directly taken from Legion, the 7th book in the Horus Heresy series. Simply put, there's too much information in my head. I've been involved in the hobby since I was 10 years old, and I'm almost 35. I have read nearly every single book, so canon, ever released. There is too much information, and if I try and unpack it, it becomes a type of video I don't want to make. The kind where it has no definitive structure, but also one that starts really irritating debates. Semantics, usually, and I can't be bothered with that. But also the editing style would be vastly different to what I normally do. So to try and break something like this down into what I can then process and produce for you to watch or listen to is a tad tricky. I've managed to bring this one down to 4 key areas, and so I'm going to go through all of those in turn. The topics in question I have listed as logistics, demographic, canon, and reasons people want it. So to start, we should go with logistics, because this is a key part. For this, a brief history lesson. There were miniatures as far back as 1988 that did, based on other models at the time, resemble female space marines. They were known as Female Warrior Gabs and Female Warrior Jane, but not much more was added to canon to explain why or how they existed or whether or not they were in fact space marines. 1988 was a vastly different time. Yes, I was only 2. But at that time, there is very little in the way of establishing because of the type of company Games Workshop was then, something which is supported by Alan Merritt, who does allude to the fact that there were miniatures made that were female back then. Alan Merritt was, for many years, the head of Games Workshop's intellectual property. He left a few years back, but he did explain on Facebook what had been going on with the issue when they started and why now. And he does reference it directly as being a logistics issue. And also the fact that at the time, in the mid-80s, most customers were not interested in buying female models. So when they decided to start making new Rogue Trader ranges, along with new Space Marine models, it was a difficult decision to add an occasional female model to the mix, because blister packs back then only had 3 Marines at a time. They were also metal, not plastic. Granted, as time progressed and they moved to plastic, this could have been something they could have addressed and changed. But other subjects within this video kinda nix that, along with the fact that they just didn't do it. It does become a little bit of a tautology. So logistically, when they were metal, it wasn't a process they were willing to spend money on when their entire premise was to make money. It wasn't until a core foundation had been laid that they were then able to expand, improve, and make it into what it is now, overpriced. The next area is demographic, because this does play into the history and should be quite short. Boys and men made up the core demographic in the 80s and 90s. It has, yes, shifted over the last decade, possibly longer, but it is still mostly boys and men. No one should forget how the company started, but one must acknowledge that how the company started played an integral part in how things progressed. And if it wasn't for these customers in the 80s and 90s, you wouldn't have the Sisters of Battle. You wouldn't have the Eldar, with the truly awesome Jane Zar and Howling Banshees. Adeptus Sororitas seriously are awesome. You wouldn't have the Kalidas Assassins. You wouldn't have the Tau that have female commanders. Do I need to continue? Because there are also female Imperial Guards as well. Since that was quite short, we should talk about canon, because this is important. If it wasn't for the 80s and 90s, the canon would never have been expanded upon. There were some base ideas, but they were expanded upon fully now. For example, we have the Horus Heresy, which directly references having female Primarchs, with Malcador saying in the book Scars, "You brothers, such a nest of rivalries. I warned him to make you sisters, that it would make things more civilized. He thought I was joking. I wasn't." This is a direct reference to the fact that Malcador had requested that some of the Primarchs be female, or explore the option of making them female. But since the Emperor was playing a long game, which we know when he and Malcador, while in a telepathic connection, play a game of regicide, with all the Primarchs on the table, we know he had considered all options to a resolution where humanity could live free of the Adeptus Astartes. Because once the galaxy had been conquered, they were no longer needed. Therefore, the only way for them to go would be to kill each other, meaning he had planned for the Horus Heresy to an extent. There were certain parts of Cogsy that he couldn't plan for. Next, we have to consider that there is a process for making a Space Marine, a biological one. Organs are implanted. Most neophytes don't survive the process, and that's exacerbated now by the Primaris process, which adds additional organs and basically makes them nearly as good as a custody. I say nearly. Nothing is as good as a custody. If you listen to a single custody talk about how amazing they are, or simply watch Emperor Text-to-Speech, seriously, they're very sexual, which is quite interesting to me for a number of reasons. Another factor to take into consideration is the gene seed. Now, this is derived from a lot of rather stolen power and tech the Emperor got when he went to Molech through a portal. He went to war with the Chaos Gods and got stuff from them. There was a deal in place, but he reneged on it, which led to the spreading of the Primarchs across the galaxy, because Horus kinda broke in when the gods took him there to show where he came from. But that could have been manipulation. Who knows? Well, it does tie in quite handily to the whole "not so impenetrable are you now." So because the Primarch's gene seed is what makes all the Astartes, it is derived from a male, making it very difficult to apply that to a female. We'll get to another issue related to all of this later. I might save it for the end because it's a bit of a zinger. There is an argument to be made that perhaps Legions 2 and 11 of the 20 legions, the Primarchs that is, could be female. But as their names are scrubbed from record, and if they were female, all of their Space Marines would also be female, and the fact that chapters 2 and 11 joined the Ultramarines and padded them out to over 300,000, one can safely assume, no, that didn't happen, and no, they are not female. But of course, Games Workshop does have a track record. When they don't get the result they want, they will nix it from all existence. Storm of Chaos is the best example. First campaign I ever played in. Chaos lost. Grimgor Ironhide won. Valten died, like a little bish. Which annoyed me because I liked Valten. But then we realise in the more recent version, I think he was meant to live long enough for Sigmar to take over his body. I think that was meant to happen. Oh well. So to the fourth and final part of this. By the way, I have oversimplified everything because if I tried to go in depth on any of this video would be several hours long, and I'd just run the risk of repeating myself. Reasons people want this. There are 3. Representation, which I can understand. Many would then counter with, Adeptus Sororitas are amazing, and you don't have men within the Adeptus Sororitas. For an obvious reason, it's in the blasted name. You have the Eldar, Dark Eldar, 2 sides to a rather interesting coin, and with all the craft worlds, you have a lot to play with. You don't see much female representation within the Orcs. Go ahead, argue semantics here. My currency is teeth, I'll gladly throw down. You could add the Tau to this, the Tyranids, although the Tyranids are essentially just one hive mind. This does carry on for quite some time. Needless to say, there are plenty of female characters everywhere. So when it comes to representation, it still comes back to demographic because it's still largely mostly men. But the next part actually kind of nixes that, because there are a lot of guys who want something, and they want it because they want their sweet, sweet Space Marine waifu. And don't tell me you don't, because I know you bloody well do. Get help. And you know why I'm telling you to get help. It's the last part of this video. The third reason they want this, by the way, cause that particular response is derived from one of my own patrons. Thank you, Discana. So the final part of this I want to quickly say. The thing that really sets Space Marines apart, you could argue genetics, and say you're building a template and you're basing it on science IRL in science fiction. So the IRL is boys' muscle mass, bone density, athleticism. These all play a key part in Space Marines, but there's something most people seem to forget. Space Marines are post-human. Space Marines can't procreate. Space Marines are essentially genderless. So having a female Space Marine is utterly redundant. And beyond feminine facial characteristics, which you could get in a post-heresy Lucius, that might come across as a slightly callous and misogynistic comment. It is not meant as such. I am merely stating it as it is. You are not going to get a female Space Marine with breasts, because breasts serve a purpose that is removed from Space Marines when they start the process. And they're hardly going to be walking around asking or telling anyone their pronouns. Instead, they're going to be shaking hands, saying well met, and shouting at you if you're not of their rank, and possibly shooting you if you're Xenos filth. Anyway, I'm a Megon, and this has been my rather short Games Workshop TED Talk. Have a lovely day, folks.